This is called the Marquesas. The Marquesas are part of French Polynesia, which vary dramatically in geological formation. Like Hawaii, the Marquesas rise out of the sea to sharp peaks with steep slopes. Hawaii is 19 degrees north of the equator, and the Marquesas are 19 degrees south. Most sailors from the west coast arrive at the main island of Hivaoa. The town of Atuana has an official check-in for traveling boats and crew. It became the first stop and gathering point for sailors after leaving Mexico. Bonnie and I had arrived after 19 days and 20 hours. Our get-together with our friends in Atuana was a potluck supper affair to trade books and tales of the crossing. For most of us, it was the first and longest extended sail. It was also our first culture shock. Cruisers get familiar with Mexico, an affordable style of living and readily available items close at hand. It changed in the Marquesas. All visitors to Polynesia are limited to 180 days maximum, and every sailor would have to post a $1,000 US dollar bond. The local store in Atuana was an Arco gas station with a selection of food items in two varieties, on the shelf or frozen. Milk, beer, and soft drinks were on the shelf, as was canned butter, and all the meat was frozen. The choice of beer was Foster's, and whether a flat of beer or soft drinks, the price was the same, 40 US dollars. Meat products were from New Zealand and Australia. There was no fresh food available. Volcanic soil did not support growing fresh vegetables, and when people tried, the gardens would get ravished by the wild pigs. The only option was the Aranui. The Aranui was an inter-island supply ship arriving with private purchase orders, fresh produce, and other perishable goods on a 10-day timetable. It would also load copra, the meat of the coconuts, racked dry by local islanders, ready for transport. It was heavy work, loading everything by hand. We soon learned the cost of handling everything on the ship. A stalk of celery was 70 US dollars, while a small watermelon was 15. It was out of proportion with Mexico's shopping prices. Every Marquesan got subsidized by the French government for the nuclear testing done on the island of Mururoa. It now made sense why they all drove expensive SUVs and had new outboard motors on their pirogues. We had 3 months to pass through all the islands we wanted to see before we hit our turn point for coming home, which was Bora Bora in Tahiti. We bid adieu to our friends and moved on to Uahuka. Uahuka is the least visited by foreign sailors, with a population of just over 600. Taiohae Bay is the only anchorage safe from weather, and Hane is the local town. We anchored out and watched and heard the surf hit the beach. It would be impossible to use our outboard in conditions like this. We picked the least active part of the beach and rowed ashore, our camera in a waterproof Pelican case. The most prominent feature is the soccer field just above the high tide line, and the flattest area before the mountains rise behind it. We noticed a man and his dog watching the locals play on the field, and as we walked by, he said, "Are you looking for something?" speaking perfect English. I thought he was the coach for the team. A little surprised, we asked, "Is there a local store?" "Sure," he said, and started walking with us. "It's right up here." "Well, you can just point us." "Oh, you'll never find it by yourselves." "So what do you do here?" "Well, I'm the doctor on the island. My clinic is up the road." We walked up through a yard where people were woodworking, carving bowls. He said something in Marquesan to a fellow. He jumped up and pulled open 2 large sliding doors entering the building and turned on lights. A store. "What would you like?" "Is cold beer a possibility?" Another word passed between the 2 men. 3 Heineken appeared and we opened them without delay. "What do we owe you for the beer?" "Nothing, it's my treat." "Thanks, what a pleasant surprise." "Why don't we walk down to the clinic and I'll show you around." We followed him to a brick-built structure with a cross attached to the wall. "Come inside, it's my home too." The VCR and personal effects left no doubt that the clinic doubled as a home. "Have you been given the elephantiasis pills yet?" "No, we didn't know they were necessary." "Oh yes, very necessary, as they prevent a mosquito-borne parasite. There is no cure, so are given freely to every visitor to French Polynesia. Here, take 2 tablets each. My name's Frederick." We talked for some time, and he offered to have us come over and watch videos, a low priority for us. "You can shower here in the clinic or sleep on the 2 beds I have here." "Well, we have our cat Winston on board, and it wouldn't be fair to leave him alone." We noticed the wood carvers and wondered if you know anything about them. Oh, I know all the carvers on the island. There's a little settlement down the road where carvers from the islands display their work when buyers come. Could we see what they have to offer? Sure, when the gallery's open, you just wander through. All the prices are marked. What is the currency for exchange? Polynesian francs. Where do we get those? Well, there isn't any bank on the island, but I could exchange some currency for you. We only have US dollars. What is the exchange rate? I don't know, but we could find a newspaper somewhere to check. He mentioned the next day was his clinic day for the island where he travels by car to villages. Would you like to accompany me? I could show you the island and do my rounds at the same time. Wow, going with the doctor on rounds? Well, I'm trained as a nurse. I'm just referred to as a doctor because I'm the medic for the island. We made our plans to meet the next morning. We woke up to an unusual noise. The Aranui had come into the bay and anchored. The crew was loading copra that had been drying and bagged in burlap sacks. The whole town gathered on the beach for the events, getting their shopping orders. As we approached the surf line, the crew on the beach told us to hold back, waiting for a friendly wave. And then they started furiously waving us in, so we rowed frantically, a little too fast. We beat the wave before it crested and came over us, flooding the inflatable with water and sand, floating our camera case away. 8 big Marquesan men ran over and lifted our boat full of water onto the beach. Now soaked with water and sand everywhere, we were the comedy hit of the day. We walked up to the road to the clinic, and when Frederick saw us, he also started laughing. Come in, have a shower, and I'll give you some dry clothes. We ended up looking like a surfer boy and his wife by the time we left. None of the islands are large, so within 30 minutes we'd arrived at Vaipei at the far west end. The stone statues and figures we saw were fascinating, so different, and left us wondering about their meanings. Frederick completed his clinic and told us it was time to travel back. On the return trip, he told us that the Polynesians were losing their history, as there was no written language to record it. The sons and fathers fished together in the past, and the stories passed down verbally. Now the fathers had outboard engines and didn't need the sons to row the pirogues. Then he told us about the garden. The botanical garden grew many of the known plants on Earth. No charge to enter. Each person was entitled to pick any fruit or vegetable, but nothing could get removed from the garden property. We drove around looking at coffee plants, star fruits, apples, and many other exotic plants. By the time we left, Frederick had a bag full of bananas, pears, starfruit, and apples. We must have looked stunned. I thought you said nothing could get taken from the gardens. Yes, but the curator is my friend, so it's okay for me. He gave them all to us. We accessed a newspaper in Vaipei showing us the exchange rate of US dollars to Polynesian francs. Frederick exchanged about $350 for us. Then we walked to the town where the gallery was. Just around the corner was a couple of miles walk. As we walked around Taiohae Bay, we could see our boat at anchor, but on the grassy slope saw a herd of horses ranging free. They were a sight to behold. We were curious about the free-ranging horses, and he said, "You whistle one over to ride it." The gallery was open with a few rooms in the small building, enough space to show us the quality and range of objects. We looked at kitchen utensils, bowls, exquisitely carved dolls, a functional boat, facial masks, and fishing spears. There were hundreds of pieces, all carved by different island wood carvers. We purchased a few items of interest, adding to our travel collection. The local art resembles their tattoos. Most of the women have earrings tattooed below their ears, and many of the men have face tattoos representing the symbols of the Marquesan warriors. They would be scary if you didn't understand the calm demeanor of the people. We offered Frederick dinner aboard the boat as thanks for all the help and information. The fare was curry chicken and rice. He was very interested, so we made arrangements for me to pick him up at the clinic and come out in the inflatable at 6 p.m. I went in alone to pick him up and he was ready. We timed our rowing out to get us past the surf line quickly and out to the boat. You could smell dinner, and we talked for a few minutes with a glass of wine. We could see the soccer field where the men were playing, and he heard whistling of players. Frederick looked up and said, "Something is wrong when they whistle for me. I have to go." Off we went, back in the dinghy, and when we reached the shore, it became apparent immediately that a problem had occurred. A player had run off the edge of the field into the rock breakwater along the shoreline, resulted in a compound fracture of his ankle. Even I knew what this was. It was an injury required surgery. We ran up to the clinic, got a stretcher and his bag, and he radioed for a medevac helicopter. There was only 45 minutes of daylight left, and the chopper only flew VFR, visual flight rules, so needed to get here and get out before dark. As a nurse, Frederick could not do the kind of surgery this poor fellow needed. We went back to the soccer field where Frederick gave him a shot of morphine and waited for the helicopter. It wasn't long before you could hear the jet-assisted French Dauphine come down the bay over our boat and onto the field. I helped load the injured player and his wife, and it took off for the hospital on Nukuhiva, the largest island. It was our next stop. We walked back towards the clinic, and Frederick was carrying a bag he didn't have before. "What's in the bag, Frederick?" He opens it, and it's full of potatoes, sweet potatoes, onions, and carrots. "What the hell, did you tell these guys to go shopping for you?" He laughed. "They know if they come here to bring these kinds of vegetables for me." We got to the clinic, and he said, "Sorry about dinner, maybe another time." We were leaving the next day. "Frederick, dinner is still ready, waiting for us. Let's go." He grabbed a bag and off we went for dinner, although it was dark now. Just as we got to the beach, he took off his t-shirt and threw it in a bush. Arriving at the boat again, Bonnie said, "My God, hearing that jet come in, I didn't know what was happening." Frederick looked at her and said it was a helicopter coming to medevac one of the soccer players. "So let's finish the glass of wine we started and have some dinner." It was informational, as he explained he would rotate out after a 2-year tour and go back to France. "But you learned how to speak Marquesan, just a part of the job." We talked about what we did back home on our trip, and he was fascinated, especially with our cat, Winston. We finished our dinner and went to sit outside in the cockpit. He stood up, grabbed the bag he brought, reached in, pulled out a mask. He promptly put it on, said, "I'm going lobster hunting," jumped over the side of the boat. Not another word was ever said. We followed his light underwater back to shore and never saw or heard from him again. It was the strangest goodbye we ever had.
Wow, what an awesome trip.